Frontline 518K, closed captioned, Apartheid Part 3, 57 minutes, 54 seconds, WGBH TV Boston.
Funding for this special Frontline series is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Tonight on Frontline, turmoil in South Africa. An unprecedented 5-part series explores over 300 years of segregation, repression, and white domination that has brought South Africa to the brink.
I've been lenient and patient. Don't push us too far.
Tonight, the white Afrikaner government tries to strengthen apartheid by forcing blacks back to tribal homelands. But the move only intensifies black resistance. Steve Biko leads a new student movement called Black Consciousness,
which is going to free the black man from the shackles of white imperialism, white slavery, white oppression. Power!
The rage of young black students finally boils over in the riots in Soweto. Repression and rebellion on Part 3 of Apartheid.
From the network of public television stations, a presentation of KCTS Seattle, WNET New York, WPBT Miami, WTVS Detroit, and WGBH Boston. This is a special Frontline series with Judy Woodruff.
Last year, pollster Lou Harris estimated that 87% of Americans condemn apartheid, South Africa's policy of racial segregation and white domination. But as a nation, we remain uncertain about how to deal with apartheid. President Reagan and the Congress continue to battle over economic sanctions against South Africa. And even as more U.S. businesses pull out of the country, we continue to depend on South Africa for vital strategic minerals. To shed some fresh light on this national debate, we offer this special 5-part Frontline series that examines South Africa's apartheid in depth, how it developed, why it persists. Before we continue our journey through South Africa's racial history, a traveler's guide to the country. South Africa lies on the other side of the world from us, across the equator at the southernmost tip of Africa. It is about 1/6 the size of the United States, with 31 million people, about 1/8 the population of the U.S. Nearly 3/4 of the people are black. The majority live in impoverished rural reserves like this one, called homelands. The rest must stay by law in ghettos called townships, near the white cities or on white-owned farms. There are several black ethnic groups, the largest being the Zulus. Almost all the 5 million whites live in the cities. South African whites have 2 distinct cultures and languages, English and Afrikaans. Afrikaans is also the first language of nearly 3 million people of mixed race, so-called colors. And there are also 1 million people of Indian extraction. South Africa's rich supplies of gold, its diamonds and strategic minerals have made it the industrial giant of Africa. For whites, it is a first world country. Johannesburg, the economic and cultural hub, looks like Denver or Houston. But the third world is only 12 miles away in Soweto, the giant township of 1.5 million that is black South Africa's nerve center. Pretoria, the administrative capital, is 40 miles to the north. Parliament meets here in Cape Town, a city much like San Francisco. Durban on the Indian Ocean is Africa's second busiest port. We now pick up our story of South Africa in the mid-1960s with Nelson Mandela in prison, the black opposition crushed, and the white Afrikaner government firmly in control of the country. Part 3 of Apartheid was produced by Alan Siegel of England's Granada Television.
Keep the order! The order!
In the 1960s, South Africa began to feel that it was the pariah of the world. Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd chose to make the country a republic. Then, unwilling to be questioned about apartheid, he quit the Commonwealth. The links that had bound South Africa to Britain were at last broken.
Well, goodbye to you all. All that I can say is our opponents who wanted us out of the Commonwealth have won their wish, but they've lost their cause. Goodbye.
Despite world outrage at her race policies, South Africa prospered as never before. The Afrikaners, whites of Dutch descent, at last climbed the economic ladder.
The political power of the Afrikaner was no longer used for correcting the real and perceived wrongdoings of the past, but was misused to overprotect it, to overprivilege the Afrikaners. And actually, the Afrikaners become relatively rich. They become a spoiled community. They become a typical Novo-Riche community.
The English speakers, 40% of the whites, had long been top dogs. They too prospered under apartheid.
The English, by and large, were very far from being liberals. They weren't truly keen on sharing the country, and particularly not keen on sharing political power with people of color, but they recoiled from the tactlessness and the gracelessness of elevating this into a policy. So by and large, they were critical of apartheid. They were opposed to it, but they weren't really formulating an alternative or keen on doing the opposite of apartheid.
White prosperity had always rested on the labor of the country's 11 million blacks. To gold and diamonds, the bedrock of the country's wealth, were now added manufacturing industries that made the new republic the industrial giant of Africa. Economic growth depended on stability. After the 1960 shootings at Sharpeville, the major black political organizations had been banned. When they turned to violence, many of their leaders were imprisoned here on Robben Island, South Africa's maximum security prison. Active black opposition was crushed.
The whole liberation movement headed by the African National Congress had been destroyed internally. It was very difficult to engage in any kind of military activity in the country because of the hostile surrounding areas and because of the demoralization. And really the movement faced a dilemma. Without a political base, you cannot get the armed struggle off the ground. And without the armed struggle, it was difficult to stimulate the political base.
One would imagine that it would have destroyed African morale. But except for the fact that after 1960, when the organizations were banned, organized activity was so very difficult. But the anger and the feeling, the need to do something about those laws never ceased.
Outside the country, attacks on South Africa's race policies increased. But Verwoerd stuck to his guns.
We have to live with our problems. As a matter of race suicide, which comes into the picture, we're not prepared for that.
Any nation in a position such as we in South Africa has to define its racial limits. And it has the right to guard those limits. In a very real sense, separate development is an act of self-defense. The whites just have to do some things that sometimes are not so pleasant But this is just a requirement to survive in South Africa.
Verwoerd gave apartheid a new, more subtle image. Where his predecessors spoke bluntly of white domination of the black majority, Verwoerd spoke of equal rights for all, but in separate parts of the country.
He gave the apartheid policy a real content. He made sense of it. Verwoerd put the essential finishing touch to it by saying that apartheid is the means by which you allow the black man to have everything that the white man has, only in his own area. He actually put apartheid forward as being not an illiberal policy, but a policy of social engineering that would at the end of the day bring justice to everybody through separation.
Dr. Verwoerd was the person that realized this, that realized at the end of the 50s that the National Party need a new kind of formulation to justify the apartheid measures, to try to give a moral justification to the policy. And then he started, in the beginning of 1959, with his idea of grand apartheid.
While the white man, as in the past, will remain the ruler over white South Africa as it develops out of this union of ours, he, as the guardian of the black man, will see to it that his development does take place in such a fashion that the black masses, as they become free, do really become free. We will not force independence from outside and from above. We will build up their democratic freedom from the bottom upwards, so that as freedom is obtained, the masses will be right for it.
Some government officials doubted whether his schemes were workable. Verwoerd simply overrode them.
Verwoerd had an obsession about this question of government policy and carrying it out. He saw himself as the Messiah. He knew all the answers. He laid down the law. He told you what to do. And yours was not a question or to query, but simply to get on with the job.
Verwoerd filled top posts with Afrikaners he trusted. They explained the benefits that he claimed grand apartheid would bring the reserves, where increasing numbers were being settled.
We say these people have their territories. We are going to assist them to develop these territories and develop their own minds, to develop their own approach to economy and to labor, and to be more productive, to be more thrifty, to be more industrious, and therefore develop an economy that will be their own.
Some African chiefs in the reserves saw that they could benefit from such policies. The government paid and protected them. In return, they enforced government schemes to increase the output of the land so more Africans could be moved there. The measures provoked resistance.
Isizathu kukubanga indlala, hlaziyo ludala indlala ebantwini bebengenanto kakade. Okwesibini, sasesithembiso sokuba umhlaba ongaphandle kwale mihlaba imithathu uzawudayiselwa abantu abanemali babe bengenamali abantu. Kwacaca kuba ke ilushaba empilweni yomuntu omtsuku. Zathenjiswa ngemali ngurhulumente, umbuso.
Increasingly, the chiefs came to be seen as tools of the government.
Inkosi kulo mthetho kamasiphathe ngokugcweleyo zabuyela kucala lokuba ngabantu abaphakathi. Bandithi ke ngoku banguhafu ebantwini, banguhafu embusweni. Ngendlela nje abanalo ilungelo eligcweleyo lokwenzana emhlabeni ngaphandle kokulenza ngokuleba. loo nto ke yasho ukuthi ngabantu abangeke babizwa ngokuthi bamalungaphi kumasiphathi ngoba asebegqibile ukutrustana ngoku abaphathanga baphethe ngomlomo ngegama.
In some parts of the country, chiefs who allied themselves with the government faced popular uprisings. In Pondoland, in eastern Transkei, African farmers rejected the chiefs and set up a government of their own away in the hills. The ANC, recently banned but still active, was taken by surprise.
The African National Congress had very little idea what was happening in Pondoland until the report started coming out, and we sent one of our Pondoland leaders to find what was happening, and he came back and told us there was a big revolt of the whole of eastern Pondoland, and the people there wanted arms.
The government sent in armed police who surrounded hundreds of tribesmen gathered at a hillside meeting.
People hoisted a white flag to show that they have no intention of fighting anybody. They have just come to discuss their grievances, and the police started shooting.
11 people were killed. As the revolt spread, the Pondo farmers boycotted white traders and burned down chiefs' huts. They murdered 2 chiefs who, they said, had arrested and tortured their leaders. In November 1960, the government declared a state of emergency in Pondoland, arrested nearly 5,000 people, and banished their leaders. The Pondoland revolt taught Verwoerd a lesson.
It was straight after that revolt that Verwoerd called the Transkeian leaders together. After he'd crushed the revolt at the end of 1960, beginning of 1961, he then called the Transkeian leaders together to tell them he was now going to give them the right to run Transkei and even independence.
I have just announced in Parliament details of the granting of self-government to the Transkei. My government is prepared to grant the Transkei a new constitution, which will create a parliament and a cabinet of ministers based on the principles of Western democracy. The Transkei will have a wholly black parliament. This means that the government is willing to grant to the Bantu nations of South Africa the opportunity to work out their own destinies, just like all other states in other parts of Africa and Asia.
Transkei's self-government was Verwoerd's masterstroke. It was the first step in his scheme to neutralize black demands for political rights. Now, he argued, blacks had no reason to demand a vote in white South Africa.
In other words, their response would be not to give black men participation or the franchise in so-called common South Africa, but to create South Africa's own internal colonies. The intention was clearly to remove South African blacks from the body politic, from South Africa, in other words, and create independent homelands.
These homelands were South Africa's reject areas. Whites kept for themselves most of the best farmland and also the mineral wealth, the gold fields around Johannesburg and the diamond mines of Kimberley. Africans, 70% of the population, could buy land only in the reserves, 13% of the country. In the 19th century, they had been forced into pockets of their original territories. Verwoerd insisted that these were their traditional tribal areas.
Their own areas, sir? What the hell is all that? I have said to many nationalists, speaking of my own small group, the Tswana-speaking South Africans, their area extends from Pretoria south over the Vaal River, encompasses the whole of the Western Free State, the Northern Cape, Botswana proper, all that area containing all the diamonds of South Africa, all the gold of South Africa, is the Tswana-speaking area of South Africa. If you were to give the Tswana people that area, maybe we could start talking.
The homelands desperately needed money. They were among the poorest lands in South Africa. A government commission urged the investment of more than $280 million. Verwoerd allowed less than half of 1% of that. When private white investors came forward, Verwoerd was adamant.
Verwoerd decreed that not a penny of white money must be spent in those dusty homelands. So the intention was never to create viable homelands, but simply labor reservoirs. Crawls where Zulus and Xhosas and so on will crawled to wait for the master to call them to come to work in so-called white South Africa. That was the intention.
What has he got to offer? He's got his labor to offer. If he doesn't work for the European, then obviously he will die of famine in his reserve.
The man who said the blacks were liable to die of famine in the reserves was the civil servant who was responsible for administering the largest of them. It was here that Verwoerd's officials sounded out black allies. Together, they agreed to push the Transkei on to become the first self-governing homeland. An ambitious chief, Kaiser Matanzima, saw that cooperating with Verwoerd was the way to secure great power for himself. To impress the world, an election was held. Matanzima's group lost, but other chiefs appointed and paid by the government were the majority in the Transkei Assembly. With their votes, Matanzima was installed as chief minister. He and his supporters were amply rewarded. Though the state was poor, the pickings for the rulers were generous.
And this is the kind of structure that the government has put in place so that these men have become puppets in the hands of the central government in Pretoria.
We are proud to have been selected to convince the world of the sincerity of the Republican government in its policy of separate development and to stand as evidence of the advantages of this policy for all concerned.
Dr. Verwoerd could boast an impressive catalogue of achievements. He had fulfilled the Afrikaner dream of complete independence. He had crushed all black opposition. He had persuaded hundreds of chiefs to embrace his homeland's policy. His vision of grand apartheid was fast becoming a reality. He was at the very pinnacle of his success.
Radio South Africa regrets to announce the death of the Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. H.S. Verwoerd. He was attacked in the House of Assembly an hour ago by a man wielding a knife, and after being rushed to hospital, was certified dead on arrival.
A deranged white man had struck him down. In September 1966, white South Africans mourned their assassinated prime minister.
Even as Mrs. Verwoerd arrived at Union Buildings for the funeral service, it was already clear in the minds of many that the dead premier's successor would be John Vorster. Like the man here being mourned, the new premier believes in the doctrine of apartheid.
As far as I'm concerned, when I've said I want to walk the road of Dr. Verwoerd, I also want to walk on that road which impelled him to promote national unity it will be my aim and object as it was his. I ask, ladies and gentlemen, your support, not for my sake, but for the sake of South Africa, our fatherland.
As Minister of Justice under Verwoerd, Vorster had given the police sweeping powers to hold suspects for long periods without trial. He was the mastermind behind the measures which had broken black opposition. In the Second World War, he had been imprisoned by the South African government for pro-Nazi activities. 1 year after becoming Prime Minister, he unveiled a memorial to his pro-Nazi wartime leader. Verwoerd had laid the foundation of Grand Apartheid. Vorster built on it. Under him and his successors, nearly 3.5 million Africans were to be forcibly removed from their homes and dumped in rural slums.
Is the situation getting better around here or worse?
Worse.
Why?
More people are coming back into this district. The soil is already very much overworked. And because there are more people coming in, the land is getting worse. They just can't possibly grow enough to eat.
Nearly 1 million people were deported from farming areas. Africans who owned land there were compelled to make way for white farmers.
They refused to go, but they knew you can't oppose the government. Yes, well, the word of the government is law. You see, the people would say, you see now, this comes from Pretoria. Who are you to oppose Pretoria?
The villagers were forced to load their possessions onto government trucks and were driven off.
Oh, they put them on the grass, gave them 2 tents, and gave them some meal, and showed them the pump where they could draw water.
Vorster was determined to shift all but essential African workers from white areas. Also, over 500,000 coloreds and Indians were driven out of the cities. In one area of Cape Town, 11,000 families were deported from the district they had lived in for generations.
They woke up one morning and there were newspaper posters plastered all over the press, which just bluntly stated District 6 declared a white area. And people are still stunned by the whole thing. Nobody people see the buildings being thrown down and lorries coming in to cart people off to Cape Flats about 14 miles away. People still don't believe that it's happening.
While the government was driving millions of blacks away from the cities, the manufacturing industry's need for a stable workforce grew. Africans were still the backbone of industry. They stole back to the cities, often illegally. The government could not deny industry labor, but it drew the line at allowing blacks trade union rights. It feared they would foment political unrest.
The minister responsible actually said that the African trade unions must be bled to death. Actual words used by the then Minister of Labour.
There were really no union rights for black workers prior to 1979. They were not allowed to strike. It was a criminal offence for a black worker to go on strike. They were not permitted to belong to the registered trade unions. They could not participate in the in wage negotiations provided by the statute. Indeed, they were not even considered to be an employee for the purposes of ordinary collective bargaining.
Government refusal to recognize black unions provoked frustrations that simmered for over a decade. In 1973, industrial tensions exploded in Durban. Thousands of workers, faced with rising living costs and low wages, put down their tools.
How many hours a week do you work?
45 per week.
45 hours a week. And you
Yes.
get 5 rands for that?
Yes, 5 rand for that. 4 rand, other one get 4 rand, other one get 3 rand.
4 rand in English money is around about £2 a week you get.
Yes.
They launched a series of wildcat strikes for better pay, which stunned Durban businessmen.
We're hoping that they will appoint negotiators so that we can negotiate. At the moment, they are not prepared to appoint anyone at all.
Now, what about the essential services of Durban?
Well, at the moment, the abattoir has just gone on strike. The City Engineers Cleansing Department are out, and we're very concerned about this.
You're in a pickle, are you?
We are at the moment, yeah.
Nobody organized the strike. It was spontaneous. It was a reaction in one factory that led to another, and workers saw that they were able to achieve by collective action an increase for themselves. The next factory realized that they could do the same. What would happen is that the employer would ask the employees at the gate to come back to work, and they refused very loudly, and in fact there was a great deal of humor and a lot of fun, certainly for workers. There was a great psychological release from the kind of oppression inside the factory to stand outside all together, and they would shout the management down. In sheer desperation, the employers would have to address their whole workforce, which in some instances were 150, in some instances 2,000 or 3,000, all standing outside the gates. And they would use loud hailers, and notwithstanding loud hailers, they would be booed down. And it certainly was an important experience for management.
It was important for the government as well. In the first 3 months of 1973, there were over 160 strikes. They helped revive political protest after a quiet decade. Faced with a new challenge to the apartheid system, Forster refused to be shifted. He insisted that continuing to move Africans into the homelands held the key to deflecting black demands. He spelled out the final stage of grand apartheid.
The policy of my government is to lead the various Bantu nations to ultimate complete independence.
Do you mean that? Do you mean complete independence?
We have said so over and over again.
That includes the normal attributes of independence, such as control of defense and
They
foreign
will be
affairs?
as free and independent as Germany or Britain or America or any other country for that matter.
In March 1974, Forster called together the homeland leaders who had been cooperating with the government. He urged them to accept his offer of independence. They flatly refused. They knew independence would be a sham to help justify apartheid. Some feared the reaction of their people. But Kaiser Matanzima, 1 week after the offer, accepted Transkei independence on Forster's terms.
As far as we are concerned, it is our desire to become free. We don't care how the world feels about it. The position cannot be reverted. We shall be free on the 26th of October. And our constitution will tell the world what our position is.
There was never any hope that independence for the Transkei could have any meaning in terms of political power and authority. We did not think that South Africa, the South Africa that we knew, could tolerate a completely autonomous state, sovereign state within its own borders.
Matanzima ignored such criticism. He insisted that the Prime Minister's offer of full independence was genuine.
I respect the Prime Minister of South Africa. He's a great, honest, and dedicated man. And I'm certain that his honesty will never change. He will give the Transkei complete sovereignty.
Nearly half of those whom the government defined as Transkei citizens lived and worked in the cities of South Africa. Many had never seen the Transkei. With independence, all would be declared foreigners in the Republic. At a stroke, 3 million blacks would lose their South African citizenship.
The main purpose of opposing the Transkei and independence was to try and protect black people against being declared foreigners and being deprived of South African citizenship. We knew that if the Transkei took independence, other tribal authorities would follow.
As Forster struck the deal with Matanzima for independence, which no state but South Africa recognized, change came to neighboring Mozambique. After a bloody war, Portugal, the colonial power in Mozambique, withdrew her troops. Marxist Frelimo guerrillas formed the independence government. For South African blacks, the news was a signal of hope.
The night of Frelimo victory was celebrated like New Year's Day when people go out in the streets and bang tin and telegraph poles and get drunk and make whoopee. I mean, it was unbelievable.
In 1974, the collapse of the Portuguese colonies around South Africa were to us a great moment of hope and a great moment of inspiration, because it is through that collapse that generated even more political activism in our country amongst the young people in particular.
The liberation of Mozambique was concrete proof that freedom could be won. A movement had been simmering among black students since 1968. Now it came to the boil. It was called Black Consciousness.
Somebody says there is no greater force in this whole world than an idea whose time has arrived. An idea whose time has arrived. And that idea, ladies and gentlemen, is black consciousness, which is going to free the black man from the shackles of white imperialism, white slavery, white oppression. Power!
A young medical student emerged as a leading figure in black consciousness. His name was Steve Biko.
He had ideas. The one thing I can remember about Steve Biko is the fertile mind that he had and his ability to transmit these ideas to other people, to motivate, to galvanize them.
Biko was the harshest critic of black timidity in the face of white rule. He wrote, "The type of black man we have today has lost his manhood. Reduced to an obliging shell, he looks with awe at the white power structure. The black man has become a shadow, drowning in his own misery. A slave and an ox bearing the yoke of oppression with sheepish timidity." Biko and his colleagues were determined to change this. They sought first to give voice to black anger against apartheid.
We understood that this particular anger that was experienced by all levels of the black community, it doesn't matter who you were, was the one ingredient that contained the seed of the destruction of apartheid. Ultimately, the fact that people would never agree with a deal with white people in this country.
In 1976, student anger began to boil over in Soweto, South Africa's largest township, just 11 miles from the center of Johannesburg. The spark that turned student frustrations into the most serious challenge yet to the apartheid state was a new government order. For years, a rule that students in secondary schools must be taught in both official languages, English and Afrikaans, had been ignored. Now, education officials ordered that arithmetic and social studies must be taught only in Afrikaans.
Well, to us, Afrikaans was not a language that we could really respect. And to us, Afrikaans was the type of language that is used in the bus offices and in the administration offices, where our own people really receive the wrath of the government.
Okkie is diep in gedagte terwyl hy hankend aanstap skool toe. Hy stap alleen omdat hy nog niemand by die nuwe skool ken nie. Kom nie, dit beteken verstaan.
Even the teachers who were hardly qualified to teach any, in fact, of the content subjects in Afrikaans were forced by virtue of a circular from the department to begin teaching in Afrikaans. So inevitably, there was complete chaos because neither the teacher could communicate. Whatever little he could communicate, the students could not understand. So inevitably, there was that breakdown.
Students now swept aside their parents' caution.
One could sense the contempt with which they viewed the older generation. That if you guys had not involved your lives in peaceful talks to these guys, we would never have inherited this problem, because the only language they understand is action.
Government officials advised their minister to withdraw the order.
There were strong warnings. There were a number of people within the department and from outside who spoke to him, pointed out the direction all this was going in. And as you know, what he said in Parliament was, look, it's our business to decide. We provide the money.
Concerned politicians arranged for a warning to be brought to Prime Minister Forster.
He was half listening to me and half interested in the proceedings in Parliament through the in-house screen. And he turned back on me and said, my doors are always open for anybody who wants to come and talk. This government will continue with the plans of implementing the regulation as we set out. What's worse, I want to give you the assurance that law and order will be maintained at all costs. Well, it's history that 8 days later, South Africa exploded in a way it had never exploded before.
On June the 16th, 1976, students in Soweto marched to protest at being taught in Afrikaans.
It was our first experience, I think, to have tear gas in our midst. And when you have a crowd of thousands of students having, in fact, been provoked in that way, the obvious response was that of outrage.
The white cop produced a pistol, and without giving any warning shot, he then shot one of the students.
He was 11 years old. He was shot through the mouth, and one boy went to his rescue. He picked him up, and he tried to find transport to take him to hospital.
We then scattered, trying to protect ourselves. We couldn't really understand what was happening because all was said that it was going to be just a peaceful demonstration.
Policemen started shooting at random, freely and without an end.
There were young people who had their shirts torn, some of whom were without shoes, some of whom were bleeding. It was a pitiful sight. You could see that these people had gone through, war.
The students now attacked anything that could be identified with white rule.
When one officer came on the very same route that the students were using, one was not surprised when they attacked him. And he actually died on the spot after his car was overturned and burned. And later, all these administration buildings were actually targeted as some of the centers where repression of people is taking place.
Thousands of police reinforcements were rushed in, but protests spread to other cities. Students now looked for open confrontation. They boycotted or burned schools. They destroyed shops and government offices. Their demands escalated. They now called for nothing less than an end to apartheid. To that, the government had a clear reply.
Agitators who do not cease their activities immediately will be prevented from continuing with it by being placed in detention in terms of the Internal Security Acts. Strong police units will be on hand to deal with any person who may try to cause a disturbance on Tuesday or on any other day. These units will have instructions to protect law-abiding citizens and property at all costs, and to do so with all the means at their disposal.
The minister's men pursued his policy with energy. They failed to contain black anger. In Soweto, students called for a workers' stay-at-home. Many migrant laborers, thinking of their wages and fearing for their jobs, defied the call. Students then attacked them and the hostels where they lived. Encouraged by the police, migrant workers hit back and attacked the townships. In the clashes that followed, more than 70 people died.
To disperse and depart from this place of gathering immediately.
In the heart of Cape Town, police confronted students. In the 4 months up to October 1976, the government estimated that 500 blacks died in clashes with the police. Others put the figure far higher. The burials became mass protests. The police broke them up.
Innocent mourners who were burying their dead were shot at. And this concerned me, and I said to my daughter, listen, it's getting a bit risky going to the funerals. You know, you've made your point. I think it's dangerous for you to go there. And her response was, you know, Dad, the girl we are burying today used to share my desk. And she was a friend. And I have gone to her home. And I have seen how much her parents loved her. But she has paid the ultimate price in the liberation struggle. If I got shot and I died, I know you'll miss me, and I know you'll be sad. But believe me, it's a price I have to pay for the liberation of our people.
Many parents shared such fears. On October the 24th, 1976, when students gathered to bury Jacob Mashabane, the police moved in.
They formed themselves into a half moon and they started throwing their guns at the ready. Now, we didn't expect them to fire. We expected them perhaps to shoot in the air or to scare us or even to charge us with bait and tear gas, you know. So we advanced into the entrance, right into the graveyard complex, you know. But unfortunately, an order was given and they fired. There was this young girl who was standing in front of me. She's the one who got it, and she collapsed right into my feet, you know. And as she was kicking and oozing blood through the mouth and the ears, you know, well, for some time I was held in a trance. But as soon as some of the bullets whistled past my head, and I turned and I fled.
7 children died and 51 were injured. The government continued to pursue student leaders.
It is at that time when a lot of students, in fact, began leaving the country, and increasingly the idea behind the departure from South Africa was that of going for military training. And the ANC in exile had, in fact, the camps, it had the instructors, it had the guns, and students saw that as the only viable option, and they moved out in thousands.
Inside South Africa, one man was trying to forge the most challenging alliance the government had faced so far. Steve Biko hoped to unite the student militants at home with the military groups now in exile. In August 1977, he was in the process of negotiating that alliance when he and a friend were stopped at a roadblock.
I whispered to Steve that I thought that it was a security police roadblock because I could see 2 or 3 men without a uniform. And they looked, I mean, you acquire a feeling about these guys after a while. They searched the car. They found the wallet that I had slipped under the seat with a bit of money in, and also my identity document, which they found. When they found it, they asked, who is P.C. Jones? So when I said, obviously it's me, it immediately struck a chord. And he asked Steve who he was. And Steve said, well, I'm Steve Biko.
One month later, after police interrogation, Steve Biko died in custody of brain damage. After the Sharpeville shootings in 1960, the upheavals had been quickly contained. After the Soweto violence of 1976, the government was forced to recognize that apartheid must adapt. The question was, by how much?
The attempts by the Afrikaner government to reform apartheid are examined on the next segment of our 5-part series on South Africa.
In the late 70s, a new prime minister, P.W. Botha, decides apartheid must adapt or die. But his moderate reforms please no one, angering many white Afrikaners.
We were sold out. We've got nothing in this country left. Then fight for it.
That's right. As the world condemns apartheid, union strikes and student rebellions unite blacks throughout the country. Finally, Botha declares a state of emergency. The army occupies the black townships, and a curtain of press censorship descends around South Africa.
We hope you'll continue this journey through South Africa's racial history on the next segment of Apartheid. I'm Judy Woodruff. Good night.
For a transcript of this program, please write to Frontline, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. Funding for this special Frontline series was provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.